According to this work by Gershom Shalom, Shabbetai Tzvi was bipolar. Shabbetai Tzvi was bipolar. The way that we would say nowadays, you would get the person Depakote or lithium or whatever it is. But bipolar, for those people that don't know, you end up with tremendous, tremendous highs and very, very, very deep, deep lows. And you end up in these manic depressive episodes. So according to Gershom Shalom says this explains everything about Shabbetai Tzvi. Because many, many times, he was incredible. He was able to be so out there and talking to people and hanging out with people and being very, being very charismatic. However, there were other times when he wasn't charismatic at all and he shut himself in. So Kabbalistically, it's very easy to explain that. Kabbalistically, when he's out there, that's one type. That's like the sun shining. However, when he's by himself, if you couch in Kabbalistic terms, that's going to be like the dark side. That's going to be where he's dealing with all sorts of demons. And that's going to be how Nathan of Gaza explained how Shabbetai Tzvi went through different cycles. However, Shabbetai Tzvi growing up is extremely traditional. He's doing everything totally correct according to this Kabbalistic method. There's one other thing that needs to be said right now. How exactly could you even come up with a type of idea of philosophy where you have someone who's up all the time and down down half the time? How exactly do you come up with this philosophy? I want to discuss that in just a little bit, but just keep in your minds the thought of the Arizal. We've actually spoken about this before. However, we'll discuss a little bit more about this in just a little bit. However, at this time, it's just becoming popularized. The Arizal's ideas, because of the printing press, the Arizal's ideas, which we're going to get way more into, become popularized. So we're going to see that Shabbetai Tzvi is very much influenced, and Nathan of Gaz is able to use these explanations of the Arizal to continue his messianic movement, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. So what happens is that Shabbetai lived in seclusion. However, he did do, and even at this time, he did do strange things. What sort of strange things? So, for example, he ends up marrying a girl. He ends up marrying a girl who's totally, totally inappropriate for him. The term, if you want to look, for example, like in Tanakh, for example, the term is called a pundiki, or as you would say, a zonah. He marries a girl of ill repute, and he marries her. And that's very problematic, because how exactly do you have a Messiah that marries someone of such low stature? Another example is that after he gets married to this girl, he ends up also getting married to a Sefer Torah. What on earth does that mean? There's an entire thing that happens. He has a whole ceremony. He gets married to Sefer Torah. And this is even the strangest part. He walks around with a baby carriage, and in the baby carriage is a fish. What on earth does any of this stuff mean? I have no idea. So let's talk about what was going on in terms of Shabbetai Tzvi. So Shabbetai Tzvi comes out and says, I'm Mashiach. Let's talk about some very important things. Number one, there was a huge Jewish community in Amsterdam. And it was a very wealthy community in Amsterdam. And most of them, I shouldn't say most, a lot of them decided to do something very interesting. They said, Mashiach has come. Shabbetai Tzvi announces himself in 1666 as Mashiach. So a lot of them said, we're moving to Israel right now. I will give you my house for pennies on the dollar, and we'll move to Israel. What happens? Obviously, Shabbetai Tzvi is not Mashiach. You have also a line in the Zohar. The Zohar says that Neshamot have to come down to the world in order for Mashiach to come, have more and more and more children. So you had at this time, you had many people who never would have gotten married to each other ever before, but they say, uh-oh, Mashiach's coming, we better get started, and they end up getting married and doing this thing. There was also a widespread tshuva movement, a huge tshuva movement. A lot of this has to do with many of these Jews who were conversos, many of these Jews from 1492, who pretended to outwardly be Christian. They came back into the fold, many of these people, and they wanted penitence, because Mashiach is coming. So therefore, they also were very, very much into this. And there's this big Baal Tshuva movement going on. So my question to you, do you want to be the rabbi that's going to get in front of this Baal Tshuva movement and say, you know what? All this Torah learning you're doing? No thank you. All of this tzedakah you're giving? No thank you. All of this messianic fervor? No thank you. So that's why, at the time, very few rabbis, you can count almost on one hand, came out against Shabbetai Tzvi. Very few rabbis. In fact, one rabbi was in Amsterdam. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Sas Portas. He was tremendous. He wrote an entire sefer called called Novel Tzvi, Tzitzat Novel Tzvi. It happens to be one of the Haftarot, which is all about a withering Tzvi. It's all about a withering Shabbetai Tzvi. So he writes against Shabbetai Tzvi at the time. Very few rabbis were willing to come out against it. And to give you an idea of how persuasive Shabbetai Tzvi was, the Taz, who was living in Poland at the time, he says, oh my gosh, is this really Mashiach? So he sends 5 emissaries, 3 sons of his and 2 sons-in-laws. And what happens is they go to Shabbetai Tzvi, they talk to him, and they come back to the Taz, and what do they tell the Taz? They say, this is Mashiach. So you could already see him. They were very scholarly. You could see he was very, very, very charismatic, and to a certain degree he was the real deal, as far as real deal is concerned, in terms of being a big scholar. There were a lot of issues, though. A lot of issues. Obviously. Which really comes out within the next period. So what happens is that what gave him the most, what gave him like the imperature, thank you so much, of kashrus. Like what gave him his kashrus? What it was, according to many, many people, and this is something that Gershom Shalom writes, he says his prophet was someone named Nathan of Gaza. He was known to be a miracle worker, whatever that means, obviously living in the Gaza area, and he was someone who was very well respected for his learning, and when he came out, even though he was much younger than Shabbetai Tzvi, about half his age, when he came out and said that Shabbetai Tzvi is the real deal, that convinced a lot of people, because he was someone who was very well respected. What happens is that the emperor, Mehmet, who we mentioned before, everyone's best friend, Mehmet IV, so he doesn't like any of the stuff going on in his empire. What's happening is, he only just wants the money. That's all he cares about. As long as trade is happening, he doesn't care. So he hears about this Messiah who might come, and at least according to many people, are coming to conquer him, and he's going to come and take over the Ottoman Empire. So he brings in Shabbetai Tzvi, and he gives Shabbetai Tzvi a choice. He says, either you're Mashiach, and therefore, what am I going to do? I'm going to take a sword and I'm going to cut your head off. And if your head doesn't come off, obviously you're Mashiach. That's one option. The other option he gave him is, or you could convert to Islam. Guess which one Shabbetai Tzvi decided to do. He wasn't going to give the first one a try. He decided to convert to Islam. And he ends up converting to Islam and living the last 10 years of his life as a Muslim, living within the palace of Mehmet IV. He was very well respected by Mehmet IV. However, he lives as a Muslim, which is really interesting. So, how exactly would you explain that? If you're Nathan of Gaza, how do you explain that? So this is where the thoughts of the Arizal are very important. This is why I mentioned it before. The Arizal has an idea that what we need to do is that we need to even go to places that might not be so kosher and take out something called the Nitzosot HaKedoshim, to take out the holy sparks. And he has an idea, which is obviously not as far as Shabbetai Tzvi is going to take it, but he has an idea that even within sin, there's holiness. Even within sin, there's holiness. So Nathan of Gaza says about Shabbetai Tzvi that he had to become Muslim. Because what's he going to do? He's going to become Muslim. He's going to, whatever he's supposed to Kabbalistically do for these hidden sparks that are hidden within Islam, he's going to purify these sparks and then come back as Mashiach. And that's it. And that's why it became Muslim, according to Nathan of Gaza. And many people believe that. Many people didn't want to give it up. Even though most Jews, already by the time he converted to Islam, they said, that's the end of your legitimate career. But many Jews continued believing in Shabbetai Tzvi. And Shabbetai Tzvi ends up dying in 1676 at the age of 50. And Nathan of Gaza ends up dying also a little bit later in 1680. However, after Shabbetai Tzvi dies, Nathan of Gaza has to come up also with a philosophy. So what's his philosophy? Once again, a lot of this has to do with Kabbalah becoming widespread. There's an idea called the Sefirot, which means Hashem has 10 different attributes. 10 different attributes. There's a whole discussion about this, about how that could happen. So what happens is that according to Nathan of Gaza, Shabbetai Tzvi had to die in order to join the Godhead, in order to become one of the 10 Sefirot. And once again, many people continued believing in him. Many people continued. So, He travels all over, and he ends up dying in 1680, like we mentioned before. So how exactly would a person observe Sabbatheanism? How would a person be a Sabbatean, basically, after 1680? After Nathan of Gaza is gone, and definitely after Shabbetai Tzvi is gone. So a few different things you could do. So for example, Avram Peretz, who lived in Salonika, he was a pupil of Natan, of Nathan of Gaza. He said that if you keep the oral law, you're a sinner. If you keep the Torah Shebaal Peh, you're a sinner. So that's obviously very, very extreme. Very extreme. However, it's based to a certain degree that what happens is a lot of these ideas, once again, are based on the Arizal. That what needs to happen over here is that you need to go to the depths of impurity in order to take out those sparks and make them holy. For those of us that sounds very, very strange, and it does sound very strange, keep in mind that has moved into legitimate, like I would say, legitimate Jewish Mesorah. So for example, there's something called the Tzavat HaBesht, which happens to be the Baal Shem Tov's, it's his last will and testament. So there's a whole question whether or not it's real, whether or not it's not. So he writes something within there that's very interesting. He says if you see a very beautiful woman, he says you shouldn't think, oh, no, I shouldn't think about that. He said what you should do is you should transfer it and say, look at that beautiful woman. She's beautiful, but guess who made her? Hashem made her. And therefore she gave you an appreciation of Hashem. So we see over here that these ideas of the Arizal, of stuff that start off as impure, that you make them into something that's more pure, that even is something over here. So there are different gradations of Sabbatheanism. So let's first get the bad ones out of the way. The absolute, worst ones out of the way, the most extreme. So this entire book is about the Don Met. The Don Met took what Shabbetai Tzvi did literally. They all converted to Islam. They all converted to Islam, and that's how they followed Shabbetai Tzvi. But secretly, they were keeping some forms of Judaism, and as I mentioned before, every Tisha B'Av, they would go out to the sea and wait for Shabbetai Tzvi to come back. Really, really interesting. Now, once again, Tisha B'Av is not a sad day. Because remember, the Messianic era has come according to this idea. So the 4 fasts about the temple, those are no longer sad days. That era is over. So Tisha B'Av was turned into a day of festivities, of eating, of drinking. I hate to say this, but there's a small group of people in Australia, I'm not going to say who what happened was they believe that their particular rabbi happens to be Mashiach, even though he passed away, and they actually did. Every single Tisha B'Av, they have a Seudah in Australia. They have the Seudah because they say the Messianic era has come, and therefore, you do not have to keep Tisha B'Av. Once again, that's not normative in the slightest. Let's continue going about weird things. There is a biblical, we actually just read about this a couple of parashiyot ago. There is a biblical prohibition about eating something called chalev. Chalev are forbidden fats. In order to get out these nitzotzot, in order to get out these sparks of impurity, you would actually have to eat chalev. You need to eat these impure fats. And not only that, you make a bracha. Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu matir asurim. Matir asurim, which we say every single morning, which is Hashem, you release the bound. According to them, they changed the bracha. They said matir asurim, that you have made that which is not allowed, now you've made it allowed. Oh my, this is really uncomfortable for me, but I'll just talk about it because it's in poskim. It's within poskim. There was actual wife swapping going on amongst many of these very, very strong Sabbatheans, many of these extreme Sabbatheans. Actual wife swapping. Why is it in our halachic literature? Because the question is, if a woman is compelled by her husband to go and be mizaneh, to go and have an inappropriate relationship with another man, does that count as forced? Does that count as ones? That's the whole discussion in poskim, which is very, very interesting. And I'm not going to talk so much about that, because next week Rabbi Blumenthal is going to talk about the Frankists, and the Frankists are really the ones who, they say they kept that mitzvah very, very well. Very well. As we mentioned before, Tisha B'Av was turned into a holiday, and that's the most extreme. What was scary about it, what was most scary about this, is that you could be sitting in shul next to somebody, and the person has a beard, the person has payas, he has a yarmulke on, he's wearing tefillin, he looks totally like you, but yet he is actually a secret follower of Shabbetai Tzvi, and he's doing all of these antimony, and he's doing all of these things in his own private life, and you have no idea. And there are all sorts of discussions in terms of families marrying into families they didn't know that were Sabbathian, and it's a whole, oh my, it's really, really crazy. However, let's just talk about a less extreme form, because when we talk about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, this is more what we have to talk about. Even after Shabbetai Tzvi died, I'll use as an example, once again I don't want to name it, but there's a sect that believe that their Rebbe is Mashiach. However, if you even speak to those people, what they have different gradations of what they believe. So for example, there are many people who believe, and this is actually, there's a whole group of these people in Tzfat, in Eretz Yisrael, who believe that their Rebbe is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's even a name for them. The term is called Elokistim. Every rabbi says you can't join with them with a minyan. That is Avodah Zarah. So that's obviously very extreme. You end up with people that say that their Rebbe didn't die. Then you end up with a lower level. Then you end up with people that say that he's coming back, which is a whole different discussion, which we'll discuss in just a moment also. And then you have easily the least extreme. So for me, this is something that doesn't bother me at all. I was one time at a wedding, and this person was telling me, he was saying, yeah, I believe that my Rebbe is Mashiach, but I believe that Mashiach is going to be the Gilgul of my Rebbe, which means it's going to be the reincarnation. So honestly, we've had such a long galut, I don't care. I don't care. Just bring it on. Just bring it on. Talking about the 40-year thing, in 1666, that's when Shabbetai Tzvi came out of the closet of sorts and said, I am Mashiach. There is a line in the Zohar that says, and I'm not going to get to authorship of the Zohar in the slightest, that says that Mashiach will hide himself for 40 years, and then he's going to come. There was a whole group of Sabbathians who moved to Eretz Yisrael to be there in 1706, to be there for the 40-year anniversary, because they thought that Shabbetai Tzvi was coming back to Eretz Yisrael to be Mashiach. To be Mashiach. Now they counted it from his apostasy, from him becoming Muslim, as opposed to his actual death. What's fascinating about that, if you've ever been to the Chorva Shul before, the Chorva Shul was made by a person named Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. According to almost all scholars, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was a secret Sabbathian, and the whole reason he went to Eretz Yisrael and made that synagogue, even though he himself didn't make it, however he's the one that started the community, was in order to welcome Shabbetai Tzvi 40 years after his apostasy. It's funny because if you go there, it's now beautiful, they rebuilt it, but there's a very, very small sign that says, not what I said right now, not at all. You could understand why most people wouldn't want that to be said. So, Shabbetai Tzvi is long dead, he's in the ground. On February 4th, like we mentioned before, 1751, Rabbi Yaakov Emden comes into his private shul and says that these amulets belong to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, and I've looked at these amulets, and these amulets are absolutely written by someone who believes in Shabbetai Tzvi. Absolutely someone who believes in Shabbetai Tzvi. In a period that we said that could be considered to be one of the greatest in all of Jewish history, the Vilna Gaon, the Pnei Yoshua, the Chida, the Ramchal, the Shagas Aryeh, some of the greatest rabbis in the entire world, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz was head and shoulders above all of them. If you're going to go ahead and start casting aspersions against him, that means you are going to the very, very top. And Rav Yaakov Emden, he was a very interesting person that we mentioned before. However, there were already signs to a certain degree, and there were already warnings to a certain degree that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz might have believed, once again, in a gradation way, that Shabbetai Tzvi was Mashiach. Now what do I mean about this? In 1725, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, he was the Av based in Prague. And in 1725, there was a person who was apprehended at the Polish border, and they found a whole bunch of Sabbathian writings. One of the Sfarim was called Ve'avo Hayom El Hamayim, that I'm going to come to the water. Water is very important in terms of Shabbetai Tzvi, hence the Dan Med, they go out to the water every Tisha B'Av. Oh, there's one last thing. I apologize. The last thing, oh my gosh. So, this is the best. Okay, we're not ending on a good part. Sorry about this. We're not ending. We're ending on a very interesting part. Guys, everyone turn to source 4. Because source 4, this person, David Friedrich Mergelin, what he does is that he shows why was Christian interest so strong? Why did they care so much about this fight, this internal strife between Shabbetai, between a follower supposedly of Shabbetai Tzvi, and between Rabbi Yaakov Emden? So he says over here, the issue at hand is not simply trade and amulets. It is not about finding a justification for the empty Kabbalistic play with words and symbols. The controversy should not be seen as an inflated fantasy or childish play. It is not, as many claim, about serious espousal of the Shabbataian heresy and so on. What is attacked here is the very substance of the Christian faith, since the Holy Trinity, the name of the true Messiah, Yeshu, and the honor of his worship, together with thereupon, build Christian creed and divine worship. The Father, together with the Son and the Spirit, so beautifully exposed in the Zohar Kabbalah, is presented as impure, ungodly, heretical, profaned, even deserving to be burned. So they burn the amulets and claim they do not deserve anything but being burned, for they contain the vain and empty name of Shabbetai Tzvi. If only we drop these two words, Shabbetai Tzvi, the entire controversy will become clear. If we explain the unbelievable expressions in the amulets according to Christian teachings, everything would fall into place. It would appear that this Rabbi Jonathan is a clandestine Christian, and that he had declared his faith in written form of 26 amulets disseminated all over Europe. The reason why it was such an international cause celebre amongst the Christians, because they said, if we can take upon ourselves Rav Yonasan, if we could claim him to be a Christian believer, oh my, think about how many converts we would get then.